I know people that literally say they won't watch a black and white movie because it's too slow or it's not relevant to today. And I mean, it's a biting commentary that was put on film almost 65 years ago. And it is still relevant today. And that's one of the beauties about film is that it's these messages and what directors and writers try and say have lasting implications. And welcome back to The Cinephile, the podcast celebrating cinema one film at a time. Each week, my co-host Jake Biller and I break down a film, discussing anything from mise en scène to scenes you missed. Today, we're talking Inherit the Wind from 1960. Jake, it was your pick this week, and most people probably haven't even heard of Inherit the Wind. So why don't we just jump into it on why did you pick it? Where did this come from? And what are your opening thoughts?
I picked this movie, not so much because I like it. I do like it. I really, really like it. This is a really, really well-made movie, I think. But I wanted to pick this because you're right. Not a lot of people have seen it, especially people our age. Even a lot of people of like our parents' generation, like they may have heard of it, but not a lot have seen it. And so I really just this movie has like I have so many thoughts on it that I really just wanted an excuse to talk about it with someone. So I kind of made you watch it for the podcast so we could talk about it. So I could finally be like, someone help me talk about this, because like I said, it's got a lot of thoughts and there's a lot of complexity to it, a lot of allegory and symbolism and all those kind of lofty literary ideas that we see oftentimes in movies, but I think this kind of almost does it to another level.
I completely agree. And this, for the folks that haven't seen it or are not familiar with Inherit the Wind, this was a stage play. So it was written in 1955, but it obviously was filmed. And to kind of start us off, the way it's written is very interesting because you're right. There's a lot of allegory. There are a lot of themes here. But what's really interesting about Inherit the Wind is the fact that since it is a stage play, it's almost like you don't need as much camera movement because a lot of the story is being told with, if you will, the proscenium, right? So we don't have like the 360 kind of getting into these characters opportunity that many films have with a camera, because this was designed, this was written to be a stage play where audiences are sitting back and just watching it. I'm really glad that we watched this movie because one, I love stage play adaptations for the most part, into cinema. But two, there's such rich themes here that we're able to discuss.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We talked about this texting back and forth when we were watching it a lot, that how it's very obvious it is a stage play. I wrote it down here. The stage play is written by, consult the one sheet of notes here, by
yes, my one sheet.
Jerome. I have so many thoughts I wrote on the backside of the sheet. Because it's the one sheet. It's the trademark one sheet. You have two sheets of paper.
Right. So you just use the back of the one sheet and pretend that you're not using it.
Yeah. But Jerome Lawrence and Robert Lee, those two wrote the stage play, and it was a smash hit, very popular on Broadway and across the country. And then the screenplay was written by Harold Jacob Smith and the how do I explain this right? So the guy's real name is Nedrick Young, but he's credited as Nathan E. Douglas because he was blacklisted. Nedrick Young was a blacklisted screenwriter, and so to still continue to work in Hollywood, he wrote under the pseudonym of I forgot it, Nathan E. Douglas. Douglas? I can't read my own. Yeah, Douglas. I can't read my own writing. Wow. I know I have terrible handwriting, but it's really bad, especially when you write in the margins. But anyways, they wrote the screenplay for it, and you're right, it has very much there's still this stage play feel. I noticed we texted a lot about the cinematography, and I noticed that we see a lot of shots from behind people's heads, and all that could make me think of is it's like you're sitting and watching a play. I mean, yes, like it's very plausible that you know when you're sitting in a courtroom, you're going to be looking from behind someone's head, or you're in a crowded street or crowded fair or tent meeting, tent revival, what have you. There's various different crowded scenes in this that you'd be looking from behind someone's head, but I feel like you don't necessarily see that a lot in a movie without it having purpose.
I noticed specifically there's a scene relatively towards the beginning where the camera has this kind of tracking shot, but it's like behind all the reporters' heads, which I don't know why. It just bothered me. It really did. But you're absolutely right, because a lot of different films, especially when they're courtroom dramas, really like to use the space between the bench and where both the defense and the prosecution are. That that area they like to use, and I mean really move the camera in and have it be there, so you have a lot of kind of front facing shots, or you're able to kind of track the movement. And this seemed a little bit more stale, and also the framing itself really bothered me. Sometimes it just felt like it wasn't framed properly. But the irony in all of this, why we're talking about the cinematography, is partially because it was nominated for an Oscar.
It was,
which is the most like 1960. There must have been like what 5 movies that came out, because you decided to choose this one. And while again, it's a great film, we're going to get into it. Don't I just hated the cinematography. I really did.
I will. So I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it. I think it could have been done a lot better. Like you pointed out, there are issues with the framing. There's a number of times that I noticed shots of someone on the witness stand, and you would have like the judge's head up here, and then the attorney's head here, and then the witness's head is like down here at the bottom of the frame.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it just felt awkward to me, considering that there was headspace from the judge at the top.
There's like a lack of headspace in this movie, which I think is actually indicative of the themes. But yeah, there's like a lack of headspace.
Yeah. But I will say that I think if you really, really dig into it, like I don't know if I'm a fan of it, but like it makes it feel claustrophobic. The fact that like we see a lot of heads in the foreground, you know what I mean? Like that tracking shot you mentioned of going down the line of reporters. I thought that was kind of an interesting way to reveal the media bench that was there. Atypical, as you pointed out. But I think just the fact that we're putting heads in the foreground makes it feel packed in, right? And this is supposed to be the biggest event, right? This movie is based on the Scopes monkey trial from 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, and it was huge national news. You know, people flocked from all over the country to be at this trial. You know, newspaper reporters, radio reporters from everywhere, all across the country, came to Dayton, Tennessee to witness this trial. So in a way, I kind of understand some of the choices when we're putting a lot of, we're putting people's heads in the foreground, because it gives you that feeling of claustrophobia. You know, you feel like someone's right on top of you, right in front of you. And also it's a courtroom drama, but it feels like the attorneys are talking to the gathered audience, the gallery, rather than they are making a legal case in a lot of ways, especially Matthew Harrison Brady, played by Frederick March. He is he's a very grandiose character, makes big, long speeches, and it feels like he's not so much there to prosecute a case, but to have a captive audience, to give a lot of lofty, idealistic speeches. You know what I mean? So I guess in that way, I can defend the cinematography in some instances. So maybe I'm not quite as harsh on it as you, but yes, there are a lot of things, especially when it comes to framing, I would have done differently.
Yeah, and the whole premise, like you said, is the Scopes monkey trial is kind of the base for all of this. Obviously, there are things that have been exaggerated, names have been changed, but this theme of evolution versus creationism starts off right from the first frame of the movie. We get this rendition of old time religion, which is a ongoing theme and motif in this. I guess it wouldn't be considered a leitmotif because it's not a part of the score, but it is a motif nonetheless. And that it just starts from the jump, and the rendition they use sucked. I hated it. I
You
don't
didn't
hate
like
the
it?
song. I did not like the audio mix.
Hmm.
I just didn't like. But I like the I felt like the themes in this were a little ham-fisted at the beginning. You know, like a little like over the top.
Movie scores from this time, you know, the 40s, 50s, 60s, even bleeds over a little bit into the 70s, I think. You really, um, you'll see like songs, like in this one, Old Time Religion, like kind of featured as part of the movie. And then you'll see kind of a lot of times scores built around it, you know, taking that theme and like incorporating it. And I feel like a lot of composers kind of run into the issue where they use it too much. This movie is almost the flip. I feel like the rest of the score was like devoid of those musical cues, and so I felt like it was almost kind of out of touch. And I felt the placement of score and the use, like the scenes they chose to have score and the scenes they didn't, I thought was off.
That is an opportunity the filmmakers have to elevate what the written word is. Right? We already have this as a stage play. It's a thought, it's already been thought through completely, but you don't have a score necessarily on Broadway for a stage play. You typically add that in as something with a film that you're able to use that non-diegetic sound to emphasize different moments. So this is a specific instance where you would think that they would kind of not necessarily not do the research, but that they would approach it from a okay, we already have the main themes here. This is how we can kind of elevate it and change it and evolve it. Evolve it. But if we can kind of change it and evolve it, and they just don't take the advantage there. They don't take the advantage with the cinematography, and I think that is something that is of the time period. If we look at this was made in 1960, but especially like 50s and the 60s film, they don't utilize the camera or the score or the lighting in such um, unique ways like we do today. Right? Obviously, we have cameras that can move differently. We have cameras that can get into tighter spaces. We have cameras that could do different lenses, you know, all this stuff. And with score, we have unique synthesizer ability. But this just seems of the time period that they just don't take the advantages that I would want them to take in elevating a material or a script or a stage play that is already fully formed.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think it's interesting we're talking about this, given the director. So Stanley Kramer is the man who directed this movie. I like a lot of Stanley Kramer's work, but I don't like it so much for the filmmaking qualities. I'll expound upon this a little bit. So Stanley Kramer made movies like the Defiant Ones. He made the Judgment at Nuremberg. Judgment or Trial at Nuremberg? Judgment. He made this movie. He made It's a Mad, Mad World, which I haven't seen. He made Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I worked with Spencer Tracy a lot, but I find it really interesting because his movies always have such complex characters and narratives, and I think they're really, really well written and well acted. But specifically, score and cinematography, I feel like his movies are sometimes, I don't know what necessarily say they're all lacking. It doesn't impress me in those instances, right? In the Defiant ones, I can think there is no score. We hear one bit of music and it's played on a radio, and it's an interesting choice. I'm not sure one I would have made. But even thinking, the Defiant ones, this movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Judgment at Nuremberg, I'm not overly impressed by the cinematography in those movies. So I think it's really interesting that when you watch a Stanley Kramer picture, from what I've seen, obviously I haven't seen his whole filmography, but I would argue to say that you're going to get something that is a really, really well told story, but is not something that's cinematic per se.
I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about toxic religion in this movie. Like I mentioned before, there's a difference. We have the kind of evolutionists and the creationists, but it is very clear that the Hillsborough, the town, is almost like an echo chamber where they don't want to hear any new ideas. And I thought this movie had a special significance watching it today when in the age of social media, we have created these echo chambers where nobody kind of gets ideas that push the boundaries. And that's kind of what Spencer Tracy's character is talking about a lot of the time, where he's like, hey, this is just a different point of view. But they're so stuck on one point of view, specifically with Brady, which is just, it's wild that, like, I texted you and I said, that they should have just requested a change of venue, because like this entire town adores that guy and he's the prosecution. I was like, bro's taking, like, the defense is taking an L from the jump when everybody is literally, fallen over in love with a guy who has the worst bald cap I've ever seen. So it's just really interesting that we have this and we're able to watch this and pull the same kind of themes. And it's almost like we haven't learned anything in like 60 years. And so I just wanted to kind of hear what you have to say on that, because that it was very striking to me. But I really appreciated it because I was able to kind of put on the lens of today and watch it and be like, hey, we see these same things still happening after almost 65 years.
Yeah, very much so. I definitely picked up on that. And I think so it's interesting knowing or just looking at this movie for the message it tries to send. So this movie is about a trial in 1925, but it's made in 1960 and is very overtly, I would say, a pushback against McCarthyism, the Red Scare in America. So it's all the more poignant that the screenwriter was blacklisted. I think that's really poignant.
Very much so.
But it's like, it's this idea of, questioning what we're told and what, the ability to think against societal norms and question society, right? I would make the argument that a lot of McCarthyism was an amplification of government fear of communism, of this new idea toppling the power structure. And I think they chose this case, the Scopes monkey trial, to kind of point out that new ideas aren't bad. We need to be able to question new ideas. That's inherently American. This is a country that's supposed to be founded on freedom. So Spencer Tracy's character makes a wonderful argument about having the right to think. And I think that's something that was evident. It's a theme that repeats often throughout American history. We just kind of interestingly looking at it through really three different slices. We're looking at it in the context of when the story is set. We're looking at it in the context of when this movie was made. And we're looking at this as a modern audience when we feel like we have the freedom to think, but it's almost, I don't want to say taken to the opposite extreme, but we're allowed to think anything. And there's through social media, like you said, or just, I guess you could say society. It's really, it really is the internet that has brought on this idea of an echo chamber, and the fact that you can find someone that agrees with you, but just because there are people that agree with you don't make you right. That makes sense.
Yeah, that 100% makes sense. And that's why I wanted to show this clip from the film, and we're going to kind of discuss it because this is Spencer Tracy's monologue kind of talking about this. Take a look.
Request permission to withdraw from this case. Mr. Drummond, you can't quit now. Why not? You were ready to 5 minutes ago.
Colonel Drummond, what reasons can you possibly have?
Well, there are 200 of them. And if that's not enough, there's one more. I think my client has already been found guilty.
Is Mr. Drummond saying that this expression of an honest emotion will in any way influence the court's impartial administration of the law?
I say that you cannot administer a wicked law impartially. You can only destroy, you can only punish. And I warn you that a wicked law like cholera destroys everyone it touches, its upholders as well as its defiers.
Colonel Drummond.
Can't you understand that if you take a law like evolution and you make it a crime to teach it in the public schools, tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools, and tomorrow you may make it a crime to read about it, and soon you may ban books and newspapers, and then you may turn Catholic against Protestant, and Protestant against Protestant, and try to foist your own religion upon the mind of man. If you can do one, you can do the other, because fanaticism and ignorance is forever busy and needs feeding. And soon, Your Honor, with banners flying and with drums beating, we'll be marching backward, through the glorious ages of that 16th century, when bigots burned the man who dared bring enlightenment and intelligence to the human mind.
I hope counsel does not mean to imply that this court is bigoted.
Well, Your Honor has the right to hope.
I have the right to do more than that.
You have the power to do more than that.
And I exercise that power. Colonel Drummond, I order you to show cause tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock why you should not be held in contempt of this court. And in the meanwhile, I order that you be held in custody of the bailiff. Bail is fixed at $2,000.
So that clip, basically, I think, shows exactly what we've been talking about. And I couldn't say it more, I guess, eloquently than Spencer Tracy does. But there's this, and it's incredible because the acting in this movie is so spectacular.
It is.
And so Brady's character frustrates the absolute living daylights out of me. Mm-hmm. Because he's over the top, but he's also not over the top. People are like that. Mm-hmm. I know people like that. It's like a warning. He gives a warning for the future and say, we're going to go backwards if you don't open your minds. And that's part of the issue with social media today, is that we are enabling people to have their minds open just enough, just as much as they want.
Yeah. It feels so poignant, and it sticks out today because he talks about banning books and restricting what can and cannot be taught in schools. That's an issue we face in many states today. It's all about, parents' right to what your kids are learning. No, it's being able to handpick what you do and do not want your child exposed to, because they think some of these things, dangerous things like social emotional learning and inherent bias or implicit bias, are dangerous things that we're teaching children, and people feel threatened by that. And so we've seen a very kind of similar outpouring at school board meetings that we've seen in this court trial, incensed crowds demanding their so-called form of justice, when really instead of justice, it's just legalizing bigotry, legalizing that echo chamber, and putting it on the books, putting it in code in state statute that we're not going to teach our kids, or we're not going to let them be taught certain things because we want to reinforce these certain values that we feel like the right to think and the right to question is going to put these things at danger, and we're afraid from losing them from society or whatever. When in fact, it's like we should have the right to think so we can debate these ideas and prove both sides of it,
Yeah, 100%. And so that's why, I wanted to play that specific clip and kind of talk about that a little bit, because I know people that literally say they won't watch a black and white movie because it's too slow or it's not relevant to today. And it's a biting commentary that was put on film almost 65 years ago. And it is still relevant today. And that's one of the beauties about film, is that it's these messages and what directors and writers try and say have lasting implications. And so that specifically is why I wanted to mention that. I also wrote down, and I know we kind of talked a little bit about this before the pod, the exact verse that this movie is titled based on this verse. So I wrote it down, and it says, "He that troubleth his own house shall inherit the wind, and the fool shall be servant to the wise in heart." And I just thought it was very interesting that they chose that specific verse as the title of the movie, because I think it's true, but I wanted to hear what you kind of have to think about it.
The first time I watched this, and a quick anecdote here, this movie is one of the reasons I love TCM, Turner Classic Movies, because this is one of those movies that like I had not heard anything about, and just one night it was on. I had finished watching probably a John Wayne movie or something, probably Western, knowing me. And this was on next. And Ben Mankiewicz so eloquently introduced it that I was like, I'm going to stick around and watch this. I like Spencer Tracy. I'm going to stick around and watch this. And I was just captivated by this movie. So shout out to TCM for the preservation and the continuing awareness they bring to classic movies like this, because we would not be having this conversation without TCM. But to go back to the title, yes, that was one of the first things that kind of grabbed me about this movie, as I was like, what does this mean? And it's actually said in the movie, which it seems corny to some people. I like it. I like it when they work the title of a movie into dialogue. I think it's just fun.
Wow, this disaster is just like 2012. Fast X.
Thanks, smartass.
Family. Family 10.
Yes. Yeah. But no, speaking of family, this verse is quoted at the big revival meeting, because the preacher, Reverend Brown, I believe is his name, he is basically he's damning Bert Cates to hell for teaching evolution before he's convicted in a court of law, and his daughter is dating Bert Cates and is in love with him.
Yeah, dude, bro is wildin'.
Bro, he literally damns his own daughter to hell. And Colonel Brady's like, "Hey, let's pump the brakes here." This movie is obviously in overtly, I don't want to say like anti-biblical, but it's anti-biblical fundamentalism, right?
Yeah,
it is very much pro Henry Drummond side and anti Matthew Harrison Brady side in this case. And then the ideas that each of those characters fight for and represent. And so I don't think you can take this literally in a biblical sense, but it's kind of meant as a warning in the context of this movie. It's meant as a warning for um, for Brady, I think, in a lot of ways. Throughout this movie, you see kind of a rise and fall to his power. You know, he comes into town in a whole big parade, and he ends the movie dying trying to get people to listen to his speech, right? Because they've realized that by the end, he's kind of been exposed as kind of a hypocrite, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. And you get the sense that he liked the attention more than he liked the ideas he was fighting for. You know what I mean?
100%.
He's very much, he's an opportunist, right? You know, it's mentioned that he ran for president 3 times. And, you know, he very much seems like kind of a politician that seems upstanding and a voice of the people on the outside, but really he's just kind of exposed as an opportunist. So in this in the context of this movie, I think it's a foreshadowing of Brady's character himself and his downfall from power, if you will, and it leads to his death because he goes in and stirs up trouble. And he inherits the wind, you know. The title kind of plays in as a warning, right? To not get caught up in the fervor of the moment, not get caught up in this, you know, holy crusade for unjust causes, you know?
Yeah, and the Holy Crusade very much overshadows what this actual trial was really about.
Exactly.
You know, and that's honestly, if you look at the OJ trial, the trial was made to be more about, did he kill his wife and his wife's friend? You know, it was all about kind of race relations in the 90s and the corruption of the LAPD. And you kind of see, and it's ironic that kind of happened when we have a movie kind of warning about talking about this holy crusade that's happening when it's overshadowing what this trial really is about. And so it can get confusing. It can get confusing for an audience member, but that's why I'm glad we're talking about this, because there are so many truths that can be pulled from this that people sleep on.
So before we move on, there's one more scene that I think really stuck out to me on this rewatch that I kind of want to talk about here. And it's the scene where it's about like half-ish way through the movie where I want to say it's after the first day of the trial. I think it's after the first day. But Henry Drummond and Matt Brady sit down in the 2 rocking chairs on the porch. And they kind of had this like very, in a movie of big, long speeches, it's like one of the few quiet moments we get. And I think it's a really, really well acted scene, really well written. It's performed beautifully by these 2 really heavyweight actors that just make a meal of this whole movie, right? I mean, if the performances sucked, we would not be talking about this movie. As good as the ideas are, if the performances sucked, there is no movie. But it's these 2 old friends that sit down, and the crowds have gone away for the day, and they finally get to kind of catch up, and they have clearly a difference of opinion. They acknowledge that there's been kind of a falling out even before this trial about differences of opinions and different social issues. And it's really, really interesting. I noticed that they're sitting in the 2 rocking chairs and they're never rocking in sync.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like
that's elite. That's actually really awesome.
I noticed it and I'm like, no, that there has to be a moment they get in sync. And they come close a couple times, but they're never in sync. And I think that's a beautiful summation of these 2 characters. But then in that scene, they're not in sync, and they're talking about their differences of ideas. But after that conversation, they have kind of a newfound respect for each other.
Yeah.
They can respect what each other thinks. They can respect this difference of opinion. Even if their rockers aren't rocking together, they can sit down and still have a conversation about it. And I think that is what this movie tries to be like, hey, this is what we need. You know, differences of ideas and opinions, different ideas, different trains of thought, different ways of thinking aren't bad. They're good. They help us move forward as a society. And we don't, we get caught up so many times in the big grandstanding speeches where, you know, it's idea against idea. I mean, you turn on cable news and that's all it is. It's just idea after idea. You know, so-and-so said this today, so-and-so said that today. And it's like, where's our rocking chairs, you know, that we can sit down and have a conversation? Because I think it's in those conversations, just like these two characters, we realize that there are still things that bind us together. You know, there's still commonality that bind us together. You and I, as good of friends as we are, don't see eye to eye on every issue.
No, Steven Spielberg's the GOAT.
But we can still sit down and have a conversation about our difference of opinions, and it doesn't lessen my opinion of you, and I would make an educated guess that it doesn't lessen your opinion of me. We respect our differences, and we don't let the things that we disagree on divide us and cause a great big stir when there's so much that binds us together.
Now, kind of moving on, we're going to do Rosebud and Thorn like we do every single week. Jake, I'm passing it off to you. What are your quick Rosebud and Thorn?
Roses. We're going to go Spencer Tracy, Frederick March, Gene Kelly. We haven't talked about Gene Kelly at all, but I really like him in this. Those three, I think, are just obviously the biggest names on the project, but their acting is superb here. I think it's really interesting. A really kind of out of typecasting role for Gene Kelly that I think really kind of shows his diversity in what he can do as an actor. So I really like that for him as well. And then the screenplay. Have to give a rose to the screenplay. It's so well written, from the big grandiose speeches down to the little details. Also going to give a rose to Stanley Kramer, the director, for being able to balance so many big ideas and make it kind of flow as a story and manage a lot of big performances, but still work in a lot of really small moments that speak volumes. So give a rose to him as well. But I am going to say cinematography. I know we've discussed that thus far, and also score. There are times that I thought it was too much, but then there are also times that I'm like, really just a little soft score here would have been really nice. So I think it just wasn't used properly. And then I have no thorns.
For me, my roses are going to be the same as yours. Both Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, along with Gene Kelly, which Gene Kelly I felt like was kind of a throwaway character. I guess maybe it's just my inability to kind of see what his point was. I felt like the movie, I guess, benefited from him being there, but also at the same time, like, I just wanted more of March and Tracy, to be honest with you. Gene Kelly turned down the role until Kramer said that it was going to be March and Tracy. And then Gene Kelly's like, okay, yeah, I'll sign on. But he hadn't gotten Spencer Tracy or Frederick March to do it yet, which is so elite. So I really liked all three of those performances. And I also got to give a rose to the screenplay. I think the screenplay is fantastic. It's a really biting commentary. So I really like that. For buds, cinematography is going to be my biggest bud. I really think it was underutilized and underused. It also really annoyed me. I have a thing about the rule of thirds. And when you break that rule, not on purpose, because sometimes, you know, if you, as an audience member, you can watch a film and you can see, okay, they aren't where they're supposed to be. You know what I mean? And so that brings tension to it. But that's, from what I could detect, that's not why the cinematography was the way it was. So that's going to be my bud. And then my thorn is Frederick March's stupid bald cap, which it just was not it. It was not it. It just looked so bad. And to be honest with you, I'm taking a leap because I don't know if Frederick March had hair or not, but his hairstyle nonetheless was absolute trash. But the question is for you folks. What are your rosebud and thorn? Had you heard of Inherit the Wind? And what are your thoughts? Leave us your thoughts in the comments down below. Now we're going to do some final thoughts. Jake, what are your quick final thoughts on Inherit the Wind?
Final thoughts. You said biting commentary. I think that's a really good way to put this movie. We talked about kind of the different ways in which it looks back, but then also kind of looks to the future. So this is a perfect example of a movie that a lot of you probably haven't heard of, but is really relevant today, even like you said, almost 65 years after the fact. And I think it's just a beautiful example of cinema and how it can speak to our lives and enrich our lives and comment on things both past and present and looking towards the future. So yeah, it's got beautiful performances in it. And it's a wonderfully written screenplay. So it's definitely one I recommend.
I would say the same thing. I think, especially for a stage to screen kind of screenplay, I think it's really well done. The performances are great. Like I said, and like you said that I said, it's a Biden commentary that is very appropriate for today's audience. Never discount a film for being black and white. And I think I can say that with some certainty for this one. Don't discount it. While it's not a perfect movie, I think in the end, it portrays and it gets across the important messages of kind of not only tolerance of other ideas, but willingness to hear them, even if you don't agree with them. Yeah, if you like this video, hit the like button and ring the bell with the subscribe button to get all notifications on upcoming content. We got plenty more in store for the rest of the year. Make sure to follow us on social media, follow the Cinephile, follow myself, and follow Jake. As you see, I don't have a Twitter/X because my opinions are for the pod and the pod only. Other than that, for Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back here next week. And cut.